They tried to claim my ranch, then had to pay for the road my family had given them free. Denise Whitmore stood beside my pickup and gave me 30 days to surrender 4,200 acres my family had owned since 1906. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten her. I just looked past her toward Cedar Pass and asked one question. Did your attorney ever check how your neighborhood reaches the county highway? She laughed. Months later, that question would be the only thing 238 homeowners wanted answered. If quiet landowners standing their ground with deeds, patience, and the law are your kind of stories, subscribe and stay with me. Because Denise had no idea what she'd just put at risk. Denise Whitmore came for my ranch on a cold September morning. I was replacing a broken fence post beside my pickup when a black SUV rolled through the open gate of Walker Ridge Ranch. It stopped hard enough to throw dust across the hood. Denise stepped out in polished boots, followed by two men carrying survey cases. She didn't introduce them. She didn't ask permission to be there. She walked straight to my truck, opened a thick folder, and spread a survey across the hood. Caleb Walker, you know who I am. Her mouth tightened. Then I'll make this simple. Pinecrest Estates has completed a boundary review. You have 30 days to surrender the disputed property. I looked down at the map. Red lines covered almost everything my family owned. All 4,200 acres of Walker Ridge Ranch, the cedar house Laura and I had shared. The north pasture, the timber ridge, the cattle ground my father worked before me. Even the hill where I'd scattered part of Laura's ashes after cancer took her 6 years earlier. I looked back at Denise. You're claiming my entire ranch, nearly all of it. She tapped the survey. According to her, Pinecrest Estates, 238 expensive homes tucked into the mountain basin east of my property, had commissioned a modern GPS survey proving generations of Walker deeds contained boundary errors. She said it like 4,000 acres could disappear because somebody changed the color of a line on a computer. One of the survey men pointed toward the western ridge. Our coordinates are extremely precise. I'm sure they are. Denise mistook that for surrender. If you cooperate, the HOA is prepared to make this transition orderly. If you don't, our attorneys will seek damages along with title. There it was. Not negotiation, a threat dressed like paperwork. I had spent most of my life fixing problems with my hands. Fence wire, frozen pumps, washed out roads. After Laura died, silence became part of that routine. It taught me something useful. People who expected an argument usually revealed more when you refused to give them one. So I studied the map again. And that's when I noticed Cedar Pass Road. The gravel road entered my ranch from the county highway, crossed Walker land for almost 3 miles, then climbed into Pinecrest Estates. Moving vans used it, school buses used it, delivery trucks used it. Every homeowner in Pinecrest used it. My father had allowed the original developers across because there wasn't another practical way into their subdivision. I had continued allowing it after he died. Nobody had ever needed to make an issue of it until Denise. I followed the red boundary line with my finger. Something about it was wrong. Not enough to explain standing beside a pickup truck. Enough to ask one question. Denise. She was already closing her folder. Did your attorney ever check how your neighborhood reaches the county highway? She stared at me, then laughed. The road isn't what we're discussing. Behind her, one of the survey men stopped packing his equipment. Just for a sec, I noticed. Denise didn't. She slid the papers toward me. 30 days, Mr. Walker. After that, Pinecrest will proceed without your cooperation. I folded the notice once and placed it on my passenger seat. Denise climbed into her SUV. The 2 surveyors followed, and within seconds they were heading back toward Pinecrest. Along Cedar Pass Road. My road. I stood beside the fence watching their taillights disappear into the pines. Maybe their survey was right. Maybe 5 generations of Walker deeds were wrong. Maybe a gated HOA established in 2003 somehow owned a ranch my family had held since 1906. But if Denise wanted the law to answer that question, I wasn't going to stop her. Because the map she'd dropped on my truck had raised another question. And if I was reading that road correctly, Denise Whitmore had just threatened to take 200 acres from the one man her entire neighborhood still depended on to get home. 3 days later, Pinecrest stopped sending paper. They started putting things on my land. I found the first orange survey flag beyond my south pasture fence, then another 50 yards deeper. By noon, I'd counted 11. The next morning, a plywood sign appeared beside Cedar Pass Road. Future Pinecrest Community Land. I photographed it exactly where it stood before pulling it from the ground. But Denise wasn't finished. 2 days later, the sound of diesel carried across the pasture. I drove down Cedar Pass and found a skid steer cutting into a turnout beside the road. Fresh dirt covered the grass, and 3 new stakes marked a line well inside my fence. I parked my pickup across from the machine. The operator shut it down. A foreman walked over. "You Caleb Walker? You're on Walker Ridge Ranch." He handed me a work authorization. The signature at the bottom belonged to Denise Whitmore. "This says Pinecrest authorized preliminary road improvements. Pinecrest doesn't own this ground. We were told they do." I handed the paper back. "Turn the machine off and leave." He hesitated. "We've got a contract, and I've got the deed." Nobody moved. So I called Sheriff Daniel Reed. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, stepped from his cruiser, and looked from the skid steer to the orange stakes. I showed him my deed, Denise's 30-day notice, and the contractor's authorization. "You have a court order?" he asked the foreman. "No." "Recorded transfer?" "No." "Then until somebody proves otherwise, you're standing on property titled to Mr. Walker." He ordered the crew out. That's when Denise's SUV came racing up Cedar Pass. She stepped out before the dust settled. "Sheriff, these contractors are performing authorized improvements." Daniel remained calm. "Authorized by whom?" "The HOA. That isn't what I asked." Her face hardened. She turned on me. "You're obstructing work that benefits 238 families because you can't accept that the boundary has changed. A boundary doesn't change because you print a new map. You're one aging rancher, Caleb. Pinecrest has attorneys, surveyors, and resources. You cannot hold an entire community back forever." I looked down at one of her orange stakes, then back at her. "Then prove you own what you're standing on." For once, Denise had no quick answer. She ordered the contractors to leave, but before getting into her SUV, she pointed toward the sign I'd removed. "Don't destroy HOA property again. It was planted on mine." Her door slammed. By sunset, Cedar Pass was quiet again. I walked every disturbed section with my phone and camera. I photographed the tire tracks, stakes, excavation, sign holes, and work authorization. I measured each stake against fence corners my father had used for decades. Then I carried everything into the Cedar house. The notice Denise had given me was still on the kitchen table. I made one phone call. Nathan Brooks practiced property law 2 counties over. He'd spent 30 years dealing with ranch boundaries, access disputes, and developers who believed legal budgets could substitute for ownership. I emailed him Denise's survey. He called back less than an hour later. "Caleb, where did they get this southwest control point?" I assumed from the county. "Don't assume anything. I heard papers moving on his end." Then Nathan went quiet. "How old is your earliest deed?" 2006. "And do you still have the family survey records?" "Some." "Find all of them." His tone had changed. "What are you seeing?" "Their survey looks precise." "That sounds bad." "No." He paused. "Precision isn't the problem." I waited. Nathan finally said, "The problem is that one of these points shouldn't be where they've put it." I looked through that kitchen window toward the dark line of Cedar Pass. Denise believed she had planted 11 stakes inside my ranch. Nathan had just given me reason to wonder whether she'd planted her entire lawsuit on the wrong one. Before we could prove it, Pinecrest turned up the pressure. The first violation notice was stapled to my wooden gate Monday morning. It ordered me to remove 2 sections of cattle fence for violating Pinecrest setback requirements. My fence had been there since 1964. By Wednesday, an attorney's letter demanded that I stop interfering with community-controlled access corridors. Friday brought another notice accusing me of delaying development and warning that Pinecrest would seek damages. I photographed every page and sent it to Nathan. His instructions never changed. Document it. Don't argue with them. Denise, meanwhile, had no problem arguing publicly. At a Pinecrest meeting, she told residents that one uncooperative landowner was threatening their property values. Someone recorded her speech, and by the next morning, it was online. Then a local television crew called. I declined. That gave Denise the microphone. She stood beside the Pinecrest entrance and described the dispute as a wealthy rancher refusing to accept a legitimate modern survey. Almost laughed at the word wealthy. Most of what I owned was dirt, timber, and grass. I wasn't interested in selling it because Laura and I had built our life there. The Cedar House was where we'd raised our daughter, Rachel. Losing the ranch wouldn't mean losing an investment. It would mean losing the last place that still felt like ours. Soon, Pinecrest residents began slowing down as they passed my house on Cedar Pass. A few held phones against their windows. One man stopped long enough to photograph my fence before driving away. The road my family had let them use for years had become the place they came to judge me from. That finally made me angry, but anger wasn't evidence. So I called Rachel. She arrived from Denver that weekend carrying a laptop, an engineering scale, and enough coffee for a long night. At 30, Rachel was a civil engineer who could read survey drawings faster than I could read a feed store invoice. Nathan joined us at the kitchen table Saturday afternoon. I brought out the Walker records, the 1906 deed, later inheritance filings, old tax maps, handwritten field notes my father had kept in a metal box. Nathan placed Denise's glossy survey beside them. Rachel studied it without speaking. Outside, 2 Pinecrest vehicles passed the house slowly. She looked toward the window. They're treating you like you stole their land. They've got better publicity. Nathan tapped the survey. Let them have publicity. We need geometry. For the next 2 hours, Rachel checked bearings and distances, while Nathan compared parcel references against the deeds. Then she stopped. She erased one calculation and ran it again. What? Rachel didn't answer. She entered the coordinates into her laptop, checked the result, then rotated Denise's survey toward Nathan. This boundary doesn't close. Nathan leaned closer. How far? Far enough that this isn't rounding error. She pointed to a southwest reference point near Cedar Pass. If I follow their bearings from here, the final line doesn't return to the starting position. They compensated somewhere. Nathan pulled the 1906 deed closer. Rachel compared the descriptions. Then her finger stopped on one coordinate. Dad, their survey isn't just drawing your boundary differently. What is it doing? She looked at me. It starts from somewhere different. The room went quiet. If Rachel was right, Pinecrest's surveyor hadn't discovered 200 acres that belonged to the HOA. He had started measuring from a point the Walker records didn't recognize, and now we needed to find out exactly what was sitting on that point, and who had put it there. Rachel spent Sunday comparing 3 records: our 1906 deed, a 1989 county road map, and Pinecrest's 2003 subdivision plat. All 3 referenced the same original Southwest monument. Denise's survey didn't. Nathan called County Surveyor Michael Turner Monday morning. Michael had worked western Colorado boundaries for more than 30 years. By noon Tuesday, he was walking the ridge with Rachel and me, carrying archived field notes and a metal detector. Denise's survey led us to a brass-capped marker near Cedar Pass. Michael crouched beside it. There it is. So that's the boundary? I asked. He shook his head. That's a monument. Doesn't mean it's your monument. He scraped dirt from the cap and read the identification number. His expression changed. This was installed during a county road improvement project. When? Rachel looked at me. Our deed referenced the boundary almost 90 years earlier. Michael checked his archived notes. The original Walker monument was never vacated. No relocation certificate, no correction survey. Nothing authorizing this marker as a property corner. So Pinecrest's surveyor used a road marker as a control point, apparently. Rachel immediately opened her laptop on the tailgate. Using the legal monument described in the older records, she recalculated the bearings. The red Pinecrest boundary shifted, then shifted again. By the time she finished, the supposed HOA acreage disappeared from Walker Ridge entirely. All 4,200 acres remained inside the historical Walker boundary. For the first time since Denise had arrived, I felt the pressure in my chest loosen. Nathan didn't celebrate. Michael, can you certify this? If the archive confirms what these notes show, yes, and testify to it? Michael looked toward Denise's orange stakes. If somebody asks a court why a 1996 road marker was used to rewrite a 1906 property boundary, I'd like to hear the answer too. That afternoon, Nathan told us something I didn't expect. We don't show Denise any of this. Rachel frowned. She gave Dad 30 days. Good duck good? Nathan folded the county map. She believes her survey is unbeatable. If we correct her privately, she can commission another one, change theories, negotiate, maybe walk away. That sounds easier, I said, for everyone. But she's already entered your property, authorized construction, and threatened title litigation. If she keeps making ownership claims after refusing to verify her starting point, those claims become part of the record. I understood. Denise had spent weeks assuming my silence meant I had nothing. Nathan wanted her to keep assuming it. Before leaving, he asked Rachel for Pinecrest's 2003 subdivision plat. He studied the development boundary, then traced Cedar Pass from the county highway through Walker Ridge to Pinecrest. His finger stopped. He checked the legend, then the recorded notes. Then he went back to the road. What? I asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Caleb, when Pinecrest was built, did your father ever sell them Cedar Pass? Not that I know of. Grant an easement? He let them use it. Nathan looked up. Those aren't the same thing. Rachel moved beside him. Nathan pointed at the plat. Pinecrest's recorded boundary ended before Cedar Pass reached my ranch. No road parcel transfer, no permanent easement notation. Nothing showing. Pinecrest owned the 3 miles its residents crossed every day. Nathan closed the file. The 4,200 acres aren't her biggest problem. Outside the kitchen window, headlights moved along Cedar Pass toward Pinecrest. 238 households were going home across my land. And somewhere inside Pinecrest's original records was the document that explained why. Denise gave us no time to find it quietly. The following week, Pinecrest filed suit. Nathan handed me the complaint in his office. Denise wasn't asking for a boundary correction anymore. The HOA demanded title to the disputed 4,200 acres, damages for delayed development, and permanent control over Cedar Pass. They doubled down, I said. Nathan shook his head. No, they went all in. That night, Denise held an emergency Pinecrest meeting. A resident sent Nathan a recording. We have the resources to finish this, Denise told the room. Mr. Walker does not. Once the court sees the evidence, Pinecrest will never again depend on one rancher's permission. Nathan stopped the recording. Play that again. I did. Permission. It was the first time Denise had publicly used that word. Inside Pinecrest, someone else had started paying attention. Linda Parker, the HOA treasurer, had spent 4 years approving ordinary expenses, snow removal, landscaping, gate repairs. Now legal invoices were arriving faster than board meetings could authorize them. One bill exceeded $38,000. Another required immediate payment. When Linda asked Denise why mediation had been rejected, Denise told her the association had no reason to compromise over property it already owned. Linda began keeping copies. Meanwhile, Nathan and I visited Walter Harris, the 71-year-old rancher whose property bordered mine to the north. Walter had watched Pinecrest rise from raw dirt 23 years earlier. When Nathan showed him the subdivision plat, Walter laughed. "They're claiming Cedar Pass now? They're claiming everything," I said. Walter leaned back. "I remember those developers coming to your father's house. That got my attention." "What for?" "The road. They couldn't get their equipment into that basin without crossing Walker land." "Did Dad sell them access?" "Not that I ever heard." Walter thought for a moment. "Your father told me he wasn't going to make families pay just to reach their homes. Said as long as they acted like neighbors, they could use the road." Nathan and I exchanged a look. "As long as they acted like neighbors?" Nathan asked. Those were his words. It wasn't proof, but it told us what document to look for. Nathan requested Pinecrest's original development records, access agreements, and board archives. Denise's attorneys objected to several requests, then delayed others. Nathan seemed almost pleased. "Are you smiling? Because people don't fight this hard over records that help them." Outside, Denise kept winning the public argument. Reporters called. Residents posted photographs. Pinecrest's attorneys described my silence as evidence that the Walker claim couldn't survive modern scrutiny. I gave them nothing. Most mornings, I split firewood behind the Cedar house while vehicles rolled past on Cedar Pass. One afternoon, Denise herself slowed beside my gate. She lowered her window. "You can still settle this, Caleb, by giving you my ranch, by accepting reality." Then she drove home, across Cedar Pass. That evening, Nathan called. "We've got a trial date. How soon?" "Soon enough that Denise won't have much time to reconsider." "And if she does?" Nathan paused. "Don't count on it." I looked at the lawsuit on my kitchen table. Denise had put the HOA's money, reputation, and legal authority behind a survey we already knew started from the wrong monument, but Nathan wasn't focused only on defeating her boundary claim anymore. Every time Denise demanded ownership, every time she rejected mediation, every time she insisted Pinecrest no longer needed my permission, she was building a record. And whatever Nathan expected to find in Pinecrest's old access files, he seemed perfectly willing to let Denise keep talking until we found it. Trial began under steady November rain. The courtroom gallery filled with Pinecrest residents. Denise sat behind 3 attorneys with binders stacked across their table. Nathan and I had 2 boxes, Rachel's calculations, and the county records Michael Turner had certified. For 6 hours, almost none of it came out. Pinecrest went first. Their surveyor projected satellite images onto a screen and walked Judge Rebecca Collins through GPS coordinates, aerial photographs, and digital boundary overlays. Our measurements are accurate to fractions of a foot. Denise's attorney glanced toward me. "And in your professional opinion, does the Walker claim conflict with those measurements?" "Yes." Nathan didn't object. The surveyor explained modern equipment, coordinate systems, and correction software. Every answer made Pinecrest's case sound cleaner. Then their attorney called me. "Mr. Walker, you allowed Pinecrest residents to use Cedar Pass for years?" "Yes." "You never charged them?" "No." "You never filed a boundary objection when the subdivision was built? And only after Pinecrest commissioned this survey did you claim the association was wrong?" "I've claimed the same thing since Denise put stakes inside my fence." He smiled. "But you have no modern survey contradicting ours, do you?" Nathan could have introduced Michael's work. He didn't. "Answer the question," Judge Collins said. "Not one commissioned before this dispute." The attorney returned to his table looking satisfied. Behind me, somebody whispered, "He's done." At lunch, I cornered Nathan in the hallway. "How long are you going to let this continue? Until they lock themselves into their methodology. They've been doing that all morning." "Exactly." The afternoon session began. Pinecrest's surveyor returned to the stand. Nathan finally rose. He carried one thin county file. No dramatic speech. No stack of exhibits. Your survey begins from control point SW17, yes. And you treated SW17 as the Walker Southwest Boundary Monument? Yes, because it corresponds with the modern coordinate network. Nathan placed a certified document on the screen. What's the installation date of SW17? The surveyor leaned forward. 6. When was the Walker deed recorded? A few people shifted behind me. Nathan called Michael Turner. Michael authenticated the county records and explained that SW17 had been installed during a road improvement project. Nathan asked the question we'd been waiting weeks to hear. Was SW17 ever legally designated as a replacement for the original Walker Boundary Monument? No. Was the original monument vacated? No. Relocated? No. Was any correction survey recorded? No. Nathan turned toward Pinecrest's surveyor. Then show this court the legal instrument authorizing you to replace a 1906 property monument with a 1996 road marker. The surveyor searched through his binder. 1 minute passed, then 2. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows. Finally, he looked toward Denise's attorneys. I don't have such an instrument. Nobody whispered now. Nathan placed Rachel's recalculated boundary beside Pinecrest's map, starting from the legally recognized monument. The red claim shifted completely off Walker Ridge Ranch. All 4,200 acres fell back inside my deed. For the first time that day, Denise stopped looking at me. Judge Collins studied both maps. Mr. Brooks, is this the defense's central challenge? Nathan glanced at me, then at the file beside his hand. No, Your Honor. Denise looked up. Nathan closed the survey binder. This establishes where Mr. Walker's property begins. He paused. We need to establish what Pinecrest was ever legally allowed to cross. And suddenly, the 4,200 acres Denise had come to take were no longer the most dangerous issue in the courtroom. Nathan placed Pinecrest's 2003 subdivision plat on the screen. Mr. Turner, show the court where Pinecrest ownership ends. Michael traced the recorded boundary. It stopped east of Cedar Pass. And who owns the road from there to the county highway? According to the recorded deeds, Walker Ridge Ranch. Denise leaned toward her attorneys. Nathan opened another exhibit. We'd finally received it 4 days before trial, buried among hundreds of pages from Pinecrest's original development files. An agreement signed by my father and the developer in 2003. Nathan looked at me before reading its title, Conditional Access License, not deed, not road transfer, not permanent easement, license. My father had allowed the developer, contractors, future residents, and authorized service vehicles to cross Cedar Pass without charge. Pinecrest had been given access because he believed neighbors should be able to reach their homes. Then Nathan reached the clause that changed the room. The permission remained effective only while use stayed cooperative, and no developer, successor association, or beneficiary asserted an adverse ownership claim against Walker property. If that happened, the license could terminate. Denise's lawsuit demanded ownership of 4,200 acres of Walker property. Her own complaint was the trigger. Pinecrest's attorney stood, Your Honor. The association was not aware that this provision remained operative. A voice came from behind him. I was. Linda Parker walked toward the witness stand carrying a folder. Denise went pale. Linda testified that while reviewing old HOA financial records, she'd found a legal memorandum sent to Denise before the lawsuit. Nathan displayed it. The warning was direct. Cedar Pass access should be formalized before any boundary litigation or adverse title claim is initiated. The attorney who wrote it had recommended negotiating a permanent easement with me before challenging Walker ownership. Denise had done the opposite. Linda produced the email showing the memo had been sent directly to Denise. Then another record showed Denise had rejected mediation. Then invoices revealed she had pushed the litigation forward anyway. Nathan approached the witness table. Ms. Parker, Did the board vote to disregard this warning? No. Were homeowners told Cedar Pass depended on a conditional license? Not at any meeting I attended. Denise's attorney tried to argue that decades of continuous use had created broader rights, but Nathan returned to the written agreement. Pinecrest hadn't been secretly crossing the road. They had been crossing under express permission. My father had documented. Judge Rebecca Collins turned toward Denise. Ms. Whitmore, stand. Denise rose slowly. Judge Collins held up the memo. You received legal advice warning that an adverse claim against Walker property could jeopardize Cedar Pass access. Denise swallowed. Our attorneys had different interpretations. That isn't my question. Silence. Rainwater streaked the courthouse windows. Judge Collins asked again, were you advised? Denise looked toward the residence behind her. Yes. One word, that was all it took. For weeks, she'd told 238 households that I was threatening their future. Now they knew she'd been warned that her own lawsuit could threaten the road they depended on. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Nathan closed the access agreement and sat beside me. Denise had come into court trying to prove Pinecrest owned my ranch. Instead, her own files had established two things. The 4,200 acres were mine, and the only practical road home for everyone who had supported her crossed land they had never owned at all. Judge Rebecca Collins issued her ruling 4 days later. The courtroom was quieter this time. She started with the boundary. Pinecrest's survey had relied on a 1996 road marker that had never legally replaced the original Walker monument. Once the correct monument was used, the disputed acreage disappeared. The court finds no valid basis for Pinecrest Estate's ownership claim. All 4,200 acres remained Walker Ridge Ranch. Then she turned to Cedar Pass. The recorded documents showed no transfer of the road to Pinecrest and no permanent easement granting the HOA unrestricted access. The community's use came from the 2003 conditional license my father had signed. Judge Collins confirmed that the HOA's adverse ownership claim had triggered the termination provision. She ordered Pinecrest to correct its property records and awarded me substantial legal costs, citing the association's decision to continue aggressive litigation despite defects in its survey and documented warnings about Cedar Pass. Behind Denise, somebody muttered, "She knew." Another resident answered, "She knew before she sued." Denise didn't turn around. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Nathan stopped to answer legal questions. I kept walking. A reporter followed me. "Mr. Walker, are you happy Pinecrest could lose access?" I stopped. "No, then what did you want? My land." I got into my pickup and drove home. Across Cedar Pass, winning should have felt bigger. Instead, when I reached the Cedar house, I found myself looking at Laura's photograph beside the kitchen window. The ranch was still ours. That was enough. But the judgment created a problem nobody could ignore. Pinecrest had no permanent right to the road. The next morning, Nathan sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You don't have to terminate access. I know. You could negotiate immediately." I looked toward Cedar Pass as another line of Pinecrest vehicles passed. "They've had 23 years to negotiate." Nathan nodded. 3 days after the ruling, Pinecrest received our certified notice. The conditional access license was terminated because the HOA had asserted the adverse ownership claim specifically prohibited by the agreement. But I wasn't going to create an emergency to prove a point. The notice provided a short transition period so Pinecrest could coordinate emergency services, notify residents, and prepare its distant service route for temporary traffic. Emergency contingency access would remain protected. Normal HOA traffic would not. Denise called Nathan within 20 minutes. Then again, her attorney requested an emergency negotiation. Nathan's answer was simple. Mr. Walker was available for negotiation before your client tried to take his ranch. By evening, Pinecrest residents had copies of the notice. Cars began stopping near my gate. Nobody filmed me now. 2 days later, a flatbed truck arrived carrying steel posts, gate sections, cameras, and a metal control box. The contractor stepped out. "Where do you want it?" I walked him to the point where Cedar Pass crossed onto Walker Ridge. "Here." As his crew unloaded the first steel section, I remembered Denise standing beside my pickup in September. The road isn't what we're discussing. Now the road was the only thing Pinecrest wanted to discuss. By sunset, 2 steel posts stood anchored beside Cedar Pass. The gate itself would remain open until the transition period expired. For the moment, headlights still passed through the ranch toward Pinecrest, but everyone driving home could see what was waiting beside the road. And for the first time in 23 years, all 238 households understood that crossing Walker Ridge had never been something they owned. It had been something my family allowed. The transition period expired at 6 Monday morning. I closed the steel gate. A sign beside it read, "Private Walker Ridge Property No. General HOA Access Emergency Contingency Access remained protected under the temporary plan Nathan had coordinated with county officials." Pinecrest wasn't isolated, but normal traffic could no longer use Cedar Pass. Within an hour, the consequences were obvious. Residents were redirected to an old service route on the eastern side of the development. It reached the county network legally, but it was steep, narrow, and added a long detour to every commute. School schedules changed, delivery companies adjusted routes, contractors began charging extra travel fees. 2 scheduled home showings were canceled before noon. Then Denise arrived. Her SUV stopped inches from the gate. She got out and pressed the intercom. Once, twice, 5 times, I was watching from the Cedar House camera. Nathan had told me not to negotiate through a gate, so I didn't. Denise stared at the steel barrier, then at the sign. 6 weeks earlier, she'd stood beside my pickup and told me Cedar Pass wasn't what we were discussing. Now she couldn't get me to discuss anything else. By Wednesday, Pinecrest called an emergency meeting. Linda Parker asked me and Walter Harris to attend. I stayed home. Walter went. "This isn't about revenge," I told him. "Make sure they understand that. They'll understand more than that before I'm finished." Linda opened the meeting with financial records projected onto the wall. Legal invoices had consumed most of Pinecrest's reserve fund. Several major expenditures had never received full board approval. Mediation proposals had been rejected. Linda displayed the memo Denise had received before filing suit. The room erupted. "You knew the road was at risk? You spent our money anyway? Why weren't we told?" Denise stood at the front trying to regain control. "I acted to protect Pinecrest's long-term interests," Linda answered immediately. "By risking its only practical road?" Denise insisted the legal outcome had been unpredictable. Walter rose from the back row. "No, it wasn't." The room quieted. "I was here when Pinecrest was dirt and survey ribbon. Caleb's father let those developers cross because they needed a way in. He didn't charge them. Caleb didn't charge you either." Walter looked directly at Denise. "You weren't protecting this community from that family. You were trying to take land from the family that had been helping it." That ended the argument. A motion was introduced to remove Denise as president. The vote wasn't close. Denise sat down before the count was even finished. Linda and several residents who had favored mediation were asked to organize an interim board. Their first decision was unanimous: no appeal, no new lawsuit, negotiate. The next morning, Nathan called me. "Pinecrest wants a recorded agreement. They had one thing for free, not anymore." I looked through the window at the closed gate. Beyond it, Denise's black SUV approached along the service connection, stopped, then turned toward Pinecrest without coming closer. For the first time since September, she had no title claim, no board presidency, and no authority to threaten me with 238 homeowners standing behind her. Nathan asked, "What do you want from them?" I thought about my father letting those first construction trucks cross Cedar Pass, about 23 years of school buses, moving vans, and families going home without paying us $1. Then I thought about Denise's stakes inside my pasture. Nothing unreasonable. Nathan waited. But nothing free. Because Pinecrest had finally learned the expensive part of mistaking permission for ownership. Now we had to decide what the road home was actually worth. 3 days later, the interim board came to my cedar house. Linda Parker sat across from me with Nathan between us. Walter Harris joined as a witness. Denise wasn't there. For the first time since September, nobody arrived with survey stakes, threats, or demands. Nathan placed a proposed agreement on the table so Crest would receive a recorded right to use Cedar Pass for ordinary residential access. This time, nothing depended on assumptions. The HOA would pay a reasonable annual road use fee. It would fund maintenance, grading, and snow removal. It would carry liability coverage for community traffic. Any future dispute had to go through mediation before litigation. And Cedar Pass could not be expanded for commercial development or heavier development traffic without my written approval. One board member read the terms twice. This is more restrictive than what we had. Nathan looked at him. What you had was permission. Another resident asked the question I'd expected. Why didn't the walkers charge Pinecrest before? I looked toward the window. Snow had started collecting along the fence Laura and I had repaired together years earlier. My father believed neighbors shouldn't have to pay each other just to get home. Nobody spoke. So did I. I looked back at them. Then your HOA tried to take the ground underneath the road. That was the end of the argument. The proposal went to Pinecrest residents that evening. It passed overwhelmingly. Nobody wanted another lawsuit. Nobody wanted Denise's version of certainty. And after seeing what legal arrogance had cost their reserve fund, most residents considered the annual road fee cheap compared with losing Cedar Pass again. The agreement was recorded with the county. Linda helped establish new financial controls requiring documented board votes for major legal expenses. Pinecrest withdrew every remaining challenge involving Walker Ridge. Denise remained out of office. There was no dramatic final confrontation between us. There didn't need to be. Her survey stakes were gone. Her lawsuit was dismissed. The 200 acres were still mine, and the community she'd promised to protect now paid for a right my family had once extended freely. I opened the steel gate the morning the agreement took effect. The first vehicle through was a school bus. Then came pickups, delivery vans, and residents heading toward the county highway. Some drivers waved, some didn't. That was fine. I hadn't fought for gratitude. I'd fought for the truth. Over the next several weeks, Pinecrest crews graded the damaged turnout their contractor had started on my land and repaired worn sections of Cedar Pass under the new agreement. When the first heavy snow came, an HOA-funded plow cleared the road before sunrise. One evening I stood beside the weathered fence as that plow came back down from Pinecrest. Its driver slowed and lifted one hand. I returned the gesture. Beyond him, headlights moved between the pines as families made their way home. I thought about Laura, about my father, about Rachel finding the coordinate that didn't close, about Michael identifying the wrong monument, Linda producing the hidden warning, and Nathan asking questions Denise should have asked before she ever came onto my ranch. Nothing we had done required threats. No retaliation in the dark. No force, just deeds, survey records, contracts, testimony, and enough patience to let the truth catch up with arrogance. Walker Ridge Ranch remained 200 acres. Cedar Pass remained where it had always been. The difference was that everyone finally understood who owned it. For years, I gave them the road for nothing. Denise taught them the difference between something being free and something being theirs.
If there's one lesson I carry away from all of this, it's that generosity still needs clear boundaries. My father let those families broad worker land because he believed neighbors ought to have neighbors. and I kept that promise for years. But when kindness gets mistaken for ownership, sometimes the bad answer isn't anger, it's knowing what the papers say, keeping good records, staying patient, and being willing to stand quietly for what is rightfully yours. In the end, Walker Ridge was still 4,200 acres. Cedar Pass was open again. Families could get home, and Pinterest finally had a clear, recorded agreement and respected both sides. Nobody needed another fight. What mattered was that the Jews had been established and land was protected, and a handshake understanding had finally become something future neighbors would have to worry about. There's certain kind of trust in that, not the loud kind, the kind that comes from knowing where you stand and refusing to let pressure make your decision for you. If you believe Caleb was right to stand his ground without losing his dignity, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA property line dispute or a neighbor who misunderstood a boundary, you are welcome to share your experience too. If story about ordinary people protecting their homes, ranches, and rights with passion and common sense are your kind of story, subscribe and stay with us. There are plenty more roads, fences, ranches, and hard-earned lessons still ahead.